pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Wow. Report from the Traffic Calming Committee. We have enough seats for everybody, right? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Can you make one general announcement, just to remind people about
Sunday?
Celebrate for
Sure.
Yeah. I know it's not generally we do it, but why not? Since it's Sunday.
Yeah. We have another chance. We talked about it on Monday, but it's not really gonna help.
So, Connie,
Oh, yes, good.
I'm holding up the AV, so why don't you read it?
Well, here is a lovely small picture of Main Street Irvington with basic information. And any restaurants in town that may want more, they are available.
Good.
This is a celebration all day on Sunday with Mayor Smith doing some important events in the middle of the day,
That's right.
right?
And on the website, this is Celebrate Irvington Day for those who can't read the poster. And on the website, the village website is a calendar of events. Lots of stuff to be done with family, with dad, with friends.
Right.
And of course, at noon, the event is going to be Brian announcing the winners of the PSA Video Festival. So we're looking forward to that. And that's my little mini announcement. Thank you, Brian, for going off.
Sure. Off the agenda.
And then down to Dr. Mack's opening his
Opening a
grand
grand
reopening of the
reopening of
store.
Dr. Max at 1 o'clock.
Where's that? He's expanded his store and he's having.
Free Macintosh computers for
Right.
everyone.
No, that's not true. That looks like a Nordstrom. You like having your baby?
I miss it.
You can erase anything on mine. Otherwise, I might borrow it some other time.
I'm in my own history that report from the Traffic Calming Committee. So I think we have enough seats for everybody if you want to come up.
Alice was not able to make the time,
Okay.
which is unfortunate because we call her the sheriff. She's the toughest of us all. Law and order.
Well, since your back is to the camera, you want to introduce yourselves?
Facing away from the camera.
Turn around. Face the camera.
Walter Montgomery.
Oh, your side for the file.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary.
If the camera comes the other
Eric
way.
only.
There's no one out there.
Oh, there's no one up there.
And is it Pecan or Pycon? Is the other member, plus there's a number of people who are neighborhood reps that have been associated with the effort over time.
Yes. We have 4 of our 5 regular members who meet every 2 weeks. We have Mark and the 3 of us. Anyway, we will make this as succinct as you wish. You know, we were established about a year ago, almost a year ago, and we got great cooperation and support from the chief, Mike Morano, mayor, board trustees, Larry, of course, and getting started. And I think it's safe to say, without being at all arrogant, that everybody had, I think, a pretty good impact in terms of building at least initial awareness of the program. And we certainly got good press attention, and thanks to certain reporters last fall in particular. And we've done a fair amount of coordination with other related programs in the village, like PACE, Walk to School program, and Eric in particular has been especially helpful with that endeavor. Probably the best test of having some reasonably positive impact is that the program obviously went viral in the river towns pretty quickly. And we've had some coordination with them, but very extremely limited. We've done a little bit of outreach. You all have done more, and the more who are involved, the better. I'm just glad to see that. that kind of effect. Tonight, at least for us, the focus, depending on what you want to do, is on what our priorities should be going forward and how to facilitate the achievement of those priorities. We met with Larry last November to discuss some immediate short-term actions that we thought were particularly, relatively, I should say, to implement. And I say relatively because nothing is easy given his time constraints and everything on his plate and all that you have to do. And then approximately 4 weeks ago, we met with him again for an update on those actions. I mean, frankly, because of the burdens that exist, in recent months, we've been a little bit disappointed that we can't move faster in implementing what we regard and what Larry regards, he agreed, are relatively simple things to do. Again, underscoring the term relatively to be sure. Especially if we're concerned that enforcement take on a faster pace from, that's our perspective. I know we talked to the chief about that last weekend with Mike, Lieutenant Morano. And there are some good signs that enforcement is perhaps becoming more intense, but it's all anecdotal. I will stress. One of the best signs for me personally was that I was sitting in a meeting yesterday and a colleague came in. He should go unnamed, but he is local and well known, and he's been here for a long time. And he said, "I got a speeding ticket from the Irvington Police," and he actually wasn't angry about it. He just said, "I got a speeding ticket. I can't believe it." And we've seen other anecdotal evidence.
The trustee from Tarrytown was coming home from the press conference for this. From Irvington. So we are getting a reputation of being what we want to be, I think, which is.
Absolutely, that's the idea.
Well, when we started a year ago, we said in this very room that the goal, perhaps quixotic, but certainly ambitious, is to create a different culture of traffic safety in the village. And one could argue that we've seen some incremental progress. Again, we'd like to see more, and part of the discussion tonight is about how can we help facilitate the achievement of that particular objective. I'm going to keep my remarks just to another minute or two, and then I'll have my colleagues to talk, and that includes Mark. I do think that if we were to focus on certain priorities, and you have, I think, a list of those in front of you, that's the short sheet, not the color coding. Thank goodness we have Mark Erland, who is the artiste of the group, and terrific at creating signage and branding. He's our branding expert. And he can also create these nicely coded, color-coded spreadsheets. But the focus is really on the shorter, simpler typed page tonight. We're not going to go through that even in any kind of detail, exactly be laborious and probably get us into time-wasting discussion at some point. But I would like to summarize it by saying that I think we're in agreement, and my colleagues will elaborate on this as they choose, or even perhaps disagree. But the priorities seem to be focusing on getting the pavement markings and speed signage up as soon as practicable. And we'd like to again try to facilitate that any way we can. And by the way, these are priorities that we essentially agreed on also. I forgot to mention this at the December 16th last year. So I don't think we're in any way, shape, or form flying in the face of what we've already discussed, the priorities that you've already agreed on. We want to see what we can do to get more data on enforcement, more specific data on where tickets are being issued and for what and when. I know you guys get a monthly accounting of citations, but my recollection of that is it doesn't provide much granularity to help you analyze what some of the trends might be. Maybe that has changed, but that's my recollection of it.
The report as we had for
Yeah,
years.
I mean, obviously, it's a good purpose.
Actually, after our meeting last week, me and the chief went through the computer, and were able to generate one with the violation and the location.
Okay.
We can include that in your monthly,
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And a date, right?
yeah, the date's there too, yeah.
Can we,
You want to take a look? That's the one.
can we get Walter as chair of the committee on that distribution list as well?
Yeah.
Is that,
Wherever you want.
yeah, because that way we can,
Yeah.
then, when we meet, we can look at it and discuss it.
That's good, that's.
Pretty much better, right, than the other one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any way to include, I don't, is there any way to include time on it too, or is that impossible?
I can try,
This
I'll
is
try
very,
tomorrow.
this is very helpful, this is,
Okay.
for us at least, I think that's a big,
Yeah, we worked on it,
a
yeah.
big leap forward.
You could put up a Google map, get a little heat map.
But that's helpful. Those, that kind of data is what we need more of. And that would also include data from the register, the radar register that's put up around the village. And Larry's been sending that to us. I'm not sure how up to date we are on that, but that's obviously an important source of data going forward. So
Also accident report?
an accident report data, what was the cause, where, when, if possible, timing, at least rough timing. The final thing I'd like to stress with regard to priorities, and I don't want to sound as though I'm too much, or I'm an expert at all on this kind of thing, but I have done some research and some study on sort of science and communication, behavioral economics, and so forth, and the group has talked about it and done its own research. And I have discovered actually that there are good studies on the impact of these radar signs, like the one that's outside Village Hall. And I've even seen a couple of chiefs of police quoted saying, "This is the best tool we have. This is better than our ordinary radar napping capabilities with motorists." And behavioral scientists and neuroscientists would tell you it's all related to the so-called feedback loop, and there's good evidence to support this, that these radar signs, like the one you have out there, do have perhaps the greatest impact. And if you can move them around, it's even better. But that would argue for having more than one or two of them in the village. It could be a very good investment and could do a lot to save on labor and have a disproportionate impact in terms of the objectives of this program. So we would like to the team, I think, for the board to consider strongly expediting the purchase of at least a couple more of those radar signs and deploying them because of their apparent cost effectiveness. Certainly there's nothing to lose, and there is science to support why they're important and support their importance.
And the chief indicated in our meeting last week that it would not be difficult to even post those signs on Broadway, that it wouldn't come under the jurisdiction
Right.
of the state,
Right.
which was really great because, as I see here, most of these summonses have been issued on Broadway. And if we have signs, then maybe we can deploy officers in different parts of the village and not have to rely so much on simply looking at Broadway.
Just to underscore this, it's under the heading of gateways, which is what we're calling the entry roads to the village. So that's North and South Broadway, Cyrusfield, Harriman, East Sunnyside, and potentially Washington/Langdon. So one of the things we did do, and this is on here already, we are suggesting purchasing more of those solar-powered radar signs to place them at least on the Broadway gate, so people coming through there will immediately get triggered by the fact that there's a speed zone change. And underscoring everything Walter said about the effectiveness psychologically of those.
Yeah, the gateway is important. And then the gateways with regard to pavement markings, we really would like to see speed limits painted on the roadways, and we discussed that with Larry. Now, obviously, on Broadway, that's a state issue.
Yeah.
But if we could pursue that with the state, that would be helpful. Anyway, those are the sort of key, immediate, one would argue, relatively simple priorities to try to pursue, and not, as I think, Larry, I think you agree with, it's not the most expensive things we're talking about in terms of actions that we could take. Now, obviously, the signs cost something. When I went to the Terrytown Slowdown meeting, they asked me about the cost of the signs, and they seemed to think that was relatively affordable. They were interested in using those. Then finally, with regard to our priorities tonight, or our focus tonight, we have these priorities and then the issue of facilitation. And what we, as a group, came up with was the idea that there ought to be some sort of ombudsman to work with Larry, the chief, lieutenant, Greg, whomever, to try to be kind of a project manager in coordinating the various necessary activities, gathering data, doing research, and being kind of a gopher that could be helpful, recognizing there's a shortage of labor as well as brain power to focus on this kind of thing. Now, the optimal solution, of course, would be to have some sort of traffic expert hired by the village at some cost that would fly in the face of my normal budgetary predilections, but that's probably not realistic, right? So you could have somebody who just is a project manager without that expertise, but could consult with the appropriate expert when necessary, basically just try to get things done in line with the kinds of priorities we're talking about. So that led to the notion of, well, who could actually do that? And don't take this the wrong way, but I said, look, I'm an old kind of semi-retired guy, and I could do it if that were acceptable. But I'm not wanting to do that to the exclusion of anybody else. Anybody else who wants to do it, that would be fabulous. And we just need to try to do what we can to facilitate all this cooperative way across the various functions of the village. And wouldn't be any salary involved. It'd be a few hours a week to try to get the projects done. And it could be somebody else. You could say, Connie could say, I really want to do that. Fabulous. But we just, we were sort of at wit's end as to how to solve this apparent personnel issue, recognizing that we all, Larry, I guess in particular, has so much on his desk already that can clutter out this kind of work, which is related directly to his function. And everything done under the authority, obviously, of Larry and the Board of Trustees. And again, if there's some other volunteer or person you want to designate, that's fabulous. So somebody has to do it. That's all I got to say. So all my goal is to say so. I just want to introduce the meeting and sort of give an overview of where we've been and where we're going.
We euphemistically referred to it as a traffic czar before we came up with, did Erica, who came up with the ombudsman? Someone did, or maybe Eric.
I think it was Eric.
Yeah.
So that's probably at least a less weighted term, but I just want to emphasize that if you look at something like this, the complexity, some of these items, even though they're broken out, some of these represent 2 or 3 or 4 steps in one row, and we have like 68 specific things that in different levels of priority and effort and everything else. So this is where it really takes someone who would be able to go step by step, work with Larry, work with DPW, work with the police chief and police department, and try to really figure out how to thread all of this together. Because unfortunately, with a density like this, what tends to happen, even with your short list, what tends to happen is a few things get done, and then other priorities come in and act as a distraction. So if it was someone's task to really move it forward.
And keep replacing the completed priorities with new priorities as well.
And when there are issues, bring them, when there are gating issues or issues of this or that, bring them up to Larry, bring them up to us or whatever. But it's just someone that's acting like as a focused neuron on getting these things moved forward.
I think we'd be happy to have Walter do that. So if someone else really wants it, then we can have some kind of runoff.
Yeah. Well, the theory, the understanding, not the theory, the actual practical understanding is that my colleague on the committee would be helping as well as need be. You need one person who can focus on it, I think, ultimately. And everybody on the committee is a lot younger than I am and has other responsibilities. I'm sort of footloose and fancy for it.
I got a lot of jobs. You're available.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mary Beth, Eric, say something.
Let you off the hook.
Well, I think Walter's more of a diplomat than I am.
I must say that my experience has been, I mean, I'm a plain speaker, and I think, we're at a point right now, thank goodness we've reached this point. I think we were questioning whether or not we can get to this point, where we should have been months and months and months ago. We launched this initiative in September, all the while thinking it's going to be a three-pronged initiative involving the informational aspect, which is sort of Irvington, the signage aspect, reviewing all the signage in the village and improving that, markings, road markings, and then from an enforcement perspective. And I really think that the second two aspects should have been implemented within 6 months of the introduction of our informational program. And here we are already in June, it's summer, and I don't see how anything's really gonna happen until a year into the program. Now, I have no experience working with village matters, I've never been a trustee, so maybe that's part of the course, I don't know. But I'm still, at this point, I'm very confident that we're gonna be able to move forward successfully with this incredibly long list that is probably only going to get longer. And I've already heard from people, just in the time we made this list, of other things that aren't even on this list that we could add to this list. And I'm sure we're going to keep looking at new things and finding new things that we have to improve on in the village. So I'm disappointed with the movement that we've seen from the village in terms of all the improvements that we've been trying to make. And this was a village-launched initiative, and I don't feel like we've gotten the backing of the village in this. I've worked with Maura behind me, introducing the walking school bus, which has been incredibly successful. We used money from the Safe Routes to School grant, federal grant, to start this program that hopefully will be a continuing program. And I've assured her before we even started doing this that, the village is working on providing safe access for the kids for the schools. We're on that. We're going to make the road safe. We're going to make the road safer. And all the while, we've just not really been able to get to the point we are today. So, I just have to say that because that's the way I feel. And I love the fact that everyone here is talking about this right now. But I really don't want to leave this meeting and then have us come back in 6 months and have accomplished 2 things on this list and say we have to do this again. I think the people of Irvington lose. And I don't feel like, sometimes I feel like the people on this committee are getting treated like we have some sort of feelings of entitlement. And I don't know, I guess my answer to that would be, yeah, we're entitled. We're entitled to have the safest village possible. And we're entitled to have the cooperation of the village in making that happen because we're volunteering our time. And our time is precious, I have other things I want to do. I know that everyone here volunteers their time. I totally respect that, and no one asked me to do this. I asked to be on this committee, but I really think that we could be much more efficient in accomplishing the task that we want to accomplish, with the end goal being that our village can be a much safer place than it is at the moment. And I think that people deserve that. People of Irvington deserve that. It is not only a safety issue, but it's also a quality of life issue. And people pay a lot of money to live in this village, and I honestly think they deserve that. So I would second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh, Walter being nominated to be a traffic czar or ombudsman, whatever we want to call it. And I would say that, he has to be able to have a certain amount of power in order to push some of these things forward and figure out, why it's taking so long and why we can't actually move forward in a lot of these things, because there are too many things on that. And I don't see how we're going to get accomplished without that. Thank you.
I agree with Eric to some degree. It's been very frustrating to come up with a document of nearly 70 specific items that we feel are really important moving forward. And just for example, banners that we've had made still sit in the closet because there's not been sufficient coordination to make sure that happens. And I think what my feeling is that the collaboration interdepartment within the village is something that I don't understand, and I don't know how much collaboration needs to happen in order to affect or to implement one of these initiatives that we've come up with. And our feeling was that if we had somebody on our side finding that out So between the DPW, the administrator, the police department, I don't know whether or not, for example, it's only the DPW that has to be advised as to where to put up the banners. Does the police need to know that? Does the administrator need to participate in that, in setting that up? So if we understand better the way the village works in that regard, then we will be less frustrated and we will be more able to suggest or to help coordinate from our end to make it happen. That to me makes a lot of sense for someone to be outside of the village looking in and understanding the workload and the lack of personnel in all of these departments. Everybody's got so much going on. So I think that makes a lot of sense, just to concur with what's already been said. We're definitely encouraged. We had a meeting with the chief last week, and we were very encouraged, and with his lieutenant, and we were encouraged to learn that an officer within the department has already been earmarked or chosen to be the enforcement officer once a new officer comes on board, and that person apparently is being
The process.
in the process of being hired. So we think that's great, and we also were told that that person will be able to have a Monday through Friday, sort of 9-to-5 type job that will be strictly about enforcement, which we were led to believe at some point that that might be a union problem. But the chief assured us that he felt that that was something that would be part under his control. So we think that's great. And we've also seen increased police presence just in the last week or two, which has been very encouraging. So we're really, just to say something positive, we're really happy about that and feel as though, we're being heard. And I think that our committee feels very strongly that we have done a lot of work and we do want to be heard and we do want this to end up being something that has some impact on the village. The only other thing I would want to say is that the notion of community engagement is so critical to this. And we had tried to get together a meeting with the chief for Q&A. Now that summer is kind of approaching, it's probably not the right time to do that. But I think we'd like to work on our committee to try to organize that for soon after the school year begins in September, where we have a village-wide meeting where we once again roll out the program, encourage people to become involved in it, and it's only by feeling ownership and empowerment that people are going to sort of own this concept that we're trying to get out there, which is to change people's behavior. So I think that's a key component, and I would love it if even all the members of the Board of Trustees and the Police Department, the Administrator, the DPW could, if they're so inclined, it would be great to think of people that you know personally who live in the village who might be interested in joining our committee or becoming neighborhood liaisons, because to me that's a sign of you being invested in the project as well, and you all represent different neighborhoods and everything else. So it might be a nice way to get us all working in a more cohesive manner.
We had neighborhood liaisons working with us last fall, and several of them, and they were doing some good work. Definitely ideas and helping with a couple of our implementational actions. That kind of fell by the wayside because there hasn't been as much implementation in the last several months, but going forward, they would also be an important resource. You want to remobilize them.
Walter, I have a question. When you say there hasn't been much implementation of what exactly?
Well,
of your priorities or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we started out with I think a good educational program. The police were working with us, Larry and others, you all. And we got some signs up. And I think the main thing I think about is we met last November, and then in December on some short-term priorities. And again, this all comes, I said over there, right? So I understand to some degree, some considerable degree, the issues of manpower, person-power shortage, right? So we agreed on last November and December haven't been implemented. And those are fundamentally the ones that are delineated in this one-page document, two-sided document. So there's been some frustration around that. It gets expressed by different personalities in different ways. But it's not met with any kind of malice, and certainly has understanding behind it in terms of recognizing what the obligations people have. They're busy with certain kinds of developmental issues in the village, what's going to happen to certain properties.
Christina, one good example of that is just, for example, there's a lot of signage in the village that's so dirty that it's almost illegible. So signs that are, speed limit signs, etc. They're obscured by trees. They're so grimy that you can't. So that's like basic sort of maintenance stuff. That's not even, that's part of what we've suggested. But that at the very least should be something that, given the fact that we've gone to this degree to come up with this document, that at the very least that kind of maintenance, I think, should be done.
Also, if you're a fairly conservative political type, you have to, which I know doesn't apply to everybody on the board, but in any event, I think you have the basic philosophy that the most important role of government, or at least one of the couple of the most important roles, is sort of the safety of citizenry. And so what could be more important with regard to safety in Irvington than everyday traffic kinds of... Again, anecdotally, I think we see some evidence of progress. Some people say, I see people being more conscious of the crosswalks on Main Street, for example.
Definitely, yeah.
And we see a Detroit police car out there.
I mean, I say this as somebody who has not been really involved in the committee, so my opinion is a bit more detached than either Eric or you or Mary Beth. But I mean, I think over the past roughly 12 months, I mean, I think that you've made extraordinary progress. I mean, you started a movement that, as Walter said, has gone viral. I was saying as you were walking in, Eric, that I was driving home from the restaurant, from my dad's restaurant the other night, and I saw a Peace Car DF bumper sticker or magnet, and I thought to myself, and also the Slow Down Rivertown signs that are posted. I mean, this initiative that you started has really taken off, and I do think that you've already made an impact. I mean, I do think that people are definitely more conscious of. I mean, I haven't been nearly hit by a car while trying to cross Main Street in at least 6 months. So I mean, I understand that you're anxious to see even more movement on many of these items, but I just want you to know that from a resident's perspective, I think you've just you've made a wonderful contribution to the village already in this regard.
Oh, thank you. I mean, to that I would say, you know what, we've talked to, hundreds of people about this, hundreds of residents of Irvington about this. And I've started before doing the pace car things, and we've met with other villages. I've been to the Hastings, Slow Down Hastings board meeting. I've talked to the Dobbs Ferry PTSA about the pace car magnets. And again, Maura and other people in our village, people who are volunteering, our neighborhood liaisons are volunteering. So we're getting this incredible feedback that we are unable to articulate to the village because we haven't been given that opportunity. And people, I mean, I agree with you. I think that things are happening and people are speaking up, but I don't think work that they deserve, because government by the people, for the people. I mean, that's what it's all about. And I think I've been talking to people on the ground that have been doing a lot of work and are invested in this. And so I'm just trying to articulate what I hear. And I think it's very important to back up our words and to do what we say we're going to do, because that will build trust. And if we don't do that, we lose the trust.
And people get very, empowered by change. They see that the efforts provide results, I think that's a way to keep the movement going
Encouraging.
and to really look forward to the things on our list that are more lofty, right? If we can get rid of the easy stuff, we can start to concentrate on the more aggressive measures that could really help change. I mean, once people get the idea that if you're coming through Irvington, there's an expectation that you're going to behave in a certain way, that would be extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah. Even if I think you're somewhat tough about it, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. By the way, one of the most important elements of this, like I'm turning back to some of the learnings from behavioral economics, forgive me, but is that the people who are in charge of the village are part of the village administration are also seen adhering to the law, so that DPW people, police officers and others are behaving in their vehicles the way that would represent the standard we're trying to set, right? And Larry's been very helpful in trying to make sure that happened. One day I walked into his office and I was really upset, more upset than I usually get. And I complained that some employee in the village was driving, talking on his cell phone, and Larry jumped on it. But everybody makes mistakes, right? But the point is that I think that people see the village employees violate the law, there's a sense of what's this all about, and you lose much of the effectiveness. So that's one important ingredient. I don't mean that's the only one, obviously.
They're the best pace cars.
Yeah, right. Anyway, that's sort of our, oh, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I just had a couple other points I was going to make. One of which is that just want to emphasize that having a traffic czar, traffic ombudsman is probably a good way of really ensuring things where we see, so we can better track where the bottlenecks are, better synchronize various efforts between the various departments, et cetera. But I think I can tell already that we're going to be gated by resources at the of street markings, signage, and some other stuff. And so I just think that as we go forward, we might need to consider whether we do what we do with the Parks Department, which is have some part-time labor that's able to come in. I don't know, or extended overtime. But if you've got things where people, you've only got a limited number of resources that can do certain tasks, and they're, essentially being gated by how much time they have to do that task, then it's going to be an issue. So I think in particular, the signage and the street markings are going to be the kind of thing that's going to be that kind of a issue that we're going to have to see as we go forward. The second thing I was going to say was just that, we're in the summertime, and we sort of started this whole thing last year with traffic safety, and we, handing out the cards, and now there's some slow down Rivertown cards to give people a variation of what you read on the toilet. So they got both, they'll be getting both cards and stops. But one thing we want to really do is push forward in the fall with extending the walk safe part, the pedestrian safety aspect of stuff. And obviously the PSA was one of the things we were trying to get in there before the end of the school year this year to get the kids involved. But so we've got the walking school bus, we've got the Walk Safe campaign, and one of the things that I have been talking about, and I think the chief has agreed to at our meeting, was in some cases you need to have a special focus on certain neighborhoods, and the Walk Safe in conjunction with the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit on Main Street, the extended school zone. We think that's going to be really effective to actually reach out to, well, I'll say this characteristically in a straightforward manner, but reach out to the Bridge Street commuter population and the Trent Street population that's commuting. one way to do that is to have a traffic slow down, right over the bridge or right on the other side of the bridge, wherever the chief determines, and hand out cards to make sure they understand two things: that there is a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit in effect for the majority of Main Street now, and two, that there are some very specific things they can do to guarantee better pedestrian safety. So that would be a focus of something that could then couple with the programs that the police have in the schools at the beginning of talk about pedestrian safety. So it all comes together. And then the final thing I just want to say is, besides, I think Mary Beth and Eric were both sort of alluding to it, or not so much alluding, but directly talking about how you hear things from various people, residents, wanting to know when this is going to happen or that going to happen, when is something going to be taken care of, and I'm sure we've all, as trustees, have all heard that too. I just want to point out that one big nut that isn't in any of this paperwork is the issue of parking. And that keeps coming back up again. It's like, well, when are you going to be dealing with parking? Where is that? So I'm just bringing that up to us to say, hey, let's not forget that either. The trustees.
Yeah, it's definitely connected.
And I'm not sure where that is, but that sort of seems that there were some ideas and some things were coming together. Got lost in the shuffle with Brightview in terms of a focus.
So back to specifics. How do we want to proceed from here? So we end this with some forward motion. You started out by, Walter, you started out by saying the issue of the pavement markings was high on your priority list. And that involves how that's worked by DPW? Are there decisions to be made about this, or is it just the doing of it?
No, there are decisions to be made about exactly
Where?
what colors to use, and we'd have to work with Larry and I presume, and Greg. And we certainly don't want to say these are the next steps, because we're not in charge, but I would say the next step would be to say, okay, begin to flesh out the actionable details, working with whomever you all or Larry designates, and then proceed to implement them. I mean, it's sort of that's. I think the basic action plan is here. The question is, what are the details with regard to these actions? And one of the key things, though, I think, is, in my view, again, at least the radar signs. So a clear next step would be, if we had our druthers, order a couple more radar signs, whatever can be afforded appropriately. Don't forget the zero budget, though. Remember, you always want zero increase.
Walter?
Yeah, and to me, that's the only thing that's missing from this is the cost column.
Well,
That's where-
the cost is going to be
Right.
the things that are the priority count and priorities here are things that we agreed last November with Larry anyway, are reasonably inexpensive, probably affordable. If I'm preempting in any way, just say so reasonably affordable, actionable, again, relatively easily. Other things are going to be much more expensive and raise other issues.
Yeah, I think
Can I just finish my thing? I just wanted to finish my thought about
mine's related.
Yeah, okay, good. My thinking about the pavement markings, if there are decisions about that someone needs someone who knows what's most effective in terms of pavement markings. I just don't want to get caught in some kind of we did something, but it really wasn't the right color, it wasn't the right kind of pavement, it was the wrong thing, it wasn't effective, it's not data-based, it's not scientific, we just did it. And I'm kind of exaggerating, but I just want to make sure that what we do, if we sign off on, let's move forward on that we don't do something that is not really best practice.
I would argue is take the ones that are the simplest. Again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but it's pretty obvious that you need, for example, simple white crosswalks. Just one small example, right? At all the aqueduct crossings, and they don't exist there at all the aqueduct crossings. go to my old neighborhood as of today, Fargo Lane, you would see examples in that area. Those are simple. I mean, Greg knows, Larry knows what has to be done in places like that, right? And places where we're saying we need some stop sign, or we need a cleaned up stop sign, that's simple stuff that can be done. Other things might require a little more research, like what's the best crosshatch crosswalk they have on Broadway. We have permission to do that, or some other intersection. So the things that need research would still be tri-edged. So you can say these things need further research, these things are clearly doable, right? And some of these are clearly doable because we do them right now. It's a question of how much they're done, how extensively they're done, how thoroughly they're done, how often they're updated.
The banners are in the closet.
And the banners are in the closet.
I just want to say about neighborhood speed zone markings on the pavement or with signage is a well-known technique. I mean, we did a lot of research last fall that proved that these kinds of signaling to people as they were entering neighborhoods was actually quite effective. But there are, there are a lot of different versions of that depending on, what state, what community you're looking at. So, I don't know if there's going to ultimately be the exact correct one, or if it's just going to be, this is the one we're going to utilize. I'm not even sure that there's probably DOT standards for the state on some of these things.
Well, the part of the job of the ombudsman was to try to figure out what needs additional research.
I guess that's my main point. That what's
would help
done
you.
is best practice, and it
Where that's
really
necessary.
works.
Well, that's necessary. It's probably not necessary. Right now, DPW goes out and paints crosswalks all the time with parking areas and all that kind of thing. That doesn't need further research, right? But I think the mayor was trying to say something.
Okay.
But I was just going to say, to me, one of my frustrations, and it's usually the first thing I talk about Larry before every meeting, is after the student was struck by a car. So the first thing my top priority was putting in a crosswalk, an enhanced crosswalk there, and then it kind of quickly went into two other kids were hit a week or two later at Main Street. And it's always, where are we in that? And we were stuck in DOT help for I don't know, 9 months or something, and then our engineer finally had to go ahead to design something, and then they had to bring it back to the DOT to have their design okayed, then it had to be switched, then it had to be approved again, but I think we're close now, but we're kind of at the cost estimate, and I think, it's gonna be, I think we had allocated about 150,000 or something like that, and it's gonna be probably more than that just for those two intersections, which frankly I'm surprised by, because we thought they received money for some stuff but that money for Main Street and things like that, so. I think
And that's Heritage Hill and
Heritage Hill and Main Street.
Broadway, Main Street.
Yeah, Broadway and Main Street, and then Heritage Hill and Broadway. So I think I was disappointed at the speed, and now I'm surprised by the cost. So I think that there's some of those things that, and I think, also for, that's kind of part one, but I think finally we're close on those two, we just figure out if we can pay for it. I think the second piece is, I think when the czar, I think we should design some kind of uniform for you, by the way. Maybe something like a Gaddafi type uniform.
I wasn't the military police.
Right, exactly. That isn't really flashy enough for this job, for the czar. But I think it might be, kind of the smart thing to do and an efficient thing to do is actually get a traffic expert in for a brief period of time under, kind of your and Larry's, direction. So it's not just, we don't want them writing a dissertation on traffic safety, but kind of saying, let's look at, if you want to do markings on the pavement, they are effective because of this, or if you do them this way, they're not the most effective thing. There's, like flashing signs on Broadway. That was, to me, the biggest slam dunk of all time, and the DOT said, no, it's going to make things worse. So there's
That's the kind of thinking that I'm really worried about.
And I think we can also do things that are, maybe more cost effective, or they're going to last longer, or whatever. Yeah. So I think that we're going to need the help of an expert, but I think if you take an expert and don't just say, hey, take a look at all this stuff, and just drive around the village and think about it, and come back in 6 months. I think if you kind of say, hey, we've identified a bunch of priorities. What do you think of them, and what's the best way to achieve this goal here? Is it marking on the pavement? Is it signage? Is it whatever? Banners, that kind of thing.
Very specific.
Exactly right. So we can limit their time and also really, kind of use their expertise, kind of very focused manner.
But you don't disagree that also there are certain things you wouldn't
Oh,
even ask that guy, like, let's put a crosswalk on Fargo Lane at the aqueduct, put a sign there warning people, so people on bicycles just don't fly across Fargo Lane. I mean, those are things that I think we don't need an expert for, but
Yes.
those are all very simple, kind of obvious, no-brainer elements of work that we could attack.
Yeah.
And you could do that, starting over the summer.
Then I think setting up a program for the radar monitoring is another thing that can be just done continually, putting it in different locations and.
Yeah.
Move it around, and get into reports,
And how much are those signs, 3,000 or 3,500?
They're actually more when you get them solar. When you get with the batteries and the solar, they end up being 4,500, something like that. I remember. I think that's about 4,500. Those two, I mean, if we could mount them permanently on either end of Broadway, that would be well worth the investment. I think the other ones can be portable to be moved around.
Yeah.
But I even saw one day I was walking, a couple of times I was walking down the high school hill, and the police one now, the old trailer is there, and you actually see, it says like 28, and then the people see it, they slam on their brakes and they slow down. So it is, I mean, I think my theory all along, and the reason I think that the awareness piece was so important is I think 9 times out of 10 when someone's speeding especially, or going through a stop, any of it, is because they're not thinking about it. And honestly, just having that little sticker on the back of my car says to me, I'm now, everyone knows it's my car, and I want to slow. I don't want to be going 55 on Broadway and passing down the right-hand lane with the slow down Irvington sticker. It's embarrassing. So I think that's a big part of it, and I think the fact that people are talking about it now, I see it on all the Facebook, the town specific, the 105.3s and 105.91s. It's funny because a lot of people are like, who's putting up all these dumb slow down Rivertown signs? Then you have people slamming them for saying that. It's very interesting to see that, but people are talking about it, and I think that that's a huge piece of this, is that for the most part, people never think about, they just think, oh my gosh, I'm 5 minutes late, so I'm gonna make it up on the way to the train down Main Street. It's impossible, first of all, but
Doesn't work.
Yeah. You might end up being 6 minutes late, but no one died, that's to me is the biggest piece of it, is the, I always say, and I stupidly engaged on the Tarrytown one and kind of said, well, they said just all more enforcement. The cops can't be everywhere.
Right.
And not all the time. So it's got to come from the people that live there. And, our data, like when we have, Field Point, there's so many speeders in Field Point. Well, when we go up there and look at it, 95 out of 100 of them are residents. So it's typically a problem that's internal. And I would guess that 75% of all of our speeders are residents, because, that's, most people are going to most of the roads, probably with the exception of Broadway. So I think that's why the kind of awareness and the piece of it has been so big. I think that's been the most successful part so far. I'm hoping the other thing, and I do think there's been some enhanced enforcement, and I think we need better data on that. But anecdotally, I hear now that you can't speed in Irvington because you're going to get pulled over. So that's been building well, which I enjoy that, by the way. So I think the big part now is really the implementation of the hard stuff. The soft stuff's all been done, and it's been done well. But now the kind of hitting the paint hitting the pavement.
Well, yeah, some of it's very mundane, that's why we need possibly, Mary Beth has volunteered and go out in the middle of August in the afternoon and paint white lanes.
Wait until it's the hottest time of the day.
Yeah. So on the awareness issue, one thing that I would notice is the guy who got the ticket, again, it's all anecdotal, but it was interesting. He was caught going 45 to 30-mile zone. He got to 45 going from Harriman to Main Street after he turned off Harriman onto Broadway, that short distance. He said, I had no idea. But the officer said to him, this is, and he didn't say it in the wrong way. He didn't say, I'm doing this only because we got the short. He said, this is part of the Rivertown's, slow down Rivertown's action, or slow down Irvington.
Yeah, slow down Irvington.
Slow down Irvington. And that's part of the awareness play. If the officer says, this is part of our program, I think it sort of helps drive home the point.
One more anecdote. Argyle, New York, which most people have probably never heard of, but you basically drive through it on Taconic. My dad got a ticket there once, and then my uncle got one, and my cousin got one. So now, even when I see it, that was 20 years ago. Whenever I see Welcome to Argyle, New York on Parkway, I slow down. And that to me is my vision for Irvington is, you know what? It is the only double area that you can speed up to 70 if you really wanted to. But I'm going to stay around 35 to 40 because I know that they hand out tickets all the time.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, I want to be Argyle of Westchester.
I think that's good. I think those radar signs can help a lot.
Yeah.
Taking the place of some manpower or supplementing the manpower in a big way. The reaction you described, if people see that, even if they've seen it before, they see that, and I mean, again, this is anecdotal, except for the science that I've read on it. It's what you described. That's the so-called psychological feedback loop. So.
I think there's two reactions. 95% of people slow down, and 5 see how fast they can get the thing to go.
Well, that could be. Those are the sociopaths.
Or the cops that are off duty.
See if they can get the white strobe to go off.
Am I right with that?
Not me.
So,
You're older now.
I stress, I do not have to be the ombudsman. Find somebody else. I mean, I'm happy to give it a shot, but honestly, somebody else. The point is, though, that person is the next step. That person, even before that person is involved, though, you all can just pursue the kinds of simple actions we talked about. But that person could help do some of that, do some of the research and so forth. So is that a clear enough answer to the next steps? I mean, these are the things, triage these things, figure out what can be done immediately, simply, and what requires more research, more effort. You could argue a simple next step would be go buy a couple more radar signs, right? Let's figure out where to put those. So that would require some thought, but that probably doesn't require a traffic expert. The chief has his own thoughts about where to put those. He mentioned those last week. So,
Yeah, and I think the line painting typically happens, and that sort of thing, it happens in the summer anyway, right? For the DPW.
Yeah.
For spring and summer.
Typically, yeah.
So I think that's I mean, to me, that's the job of the ombudsman, and the fact that you wouldn't have to wait for a work session to move forward. The ombudsman can be triaging this list, like Walter said, and moving forward on individual things continuously, working with the board of trustees and Larry and the DPW and the chief. It just seems very efficient that way, so that we don't make the mistake where we put in these road markings that are not best practice. And you can go through this list, and then you can realize the issues that you need to actually get an expert opinion on, and you can put those aside for later.
I guess I would like to know, I mean, it sounds to me like Walter playing this role would be a wonderful way to keep him busy and involved in this effort.
my wife agrees.
Yeah. But I would actually like to hear, and maybe we don't have to do it all now, but the police and Larry's office, and there'd be a lot of people who would have to understand and like that idea and see how it works. I mean, you can't have systems that kind of fall apart because who's in charge of what?
No.
And people are saying, oh, I thought you did that, and no, that's your job, and oh, wait, I thought I was the person here that helps you. I mean, you can see how it has to be vetted in order to work.
Well,
So-
it has to be a cooperative relationship. If Larry thinks it's a bad idea, or the chief does, or
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Greg, and there's only sort of a grudging acceptance of it, that's not gonna
Right.
do much. It allows it to be very mundane in the weeds work, like, okay, I gotta go spend an hour with Greg to figure out where we're gonna put this and what's the best way to do it, and we need more research on this, spend time with Larry, analyzing some of the priorities. It's painstaking, and you know, on hot summer days, it could be a little difficult, but.
And the goal is not to make their job any more complicated, that's not the goal.
Yes, right,
The
that's
goal
my
for
point.
us is to make it easier
Yeah.
and have it flow more seamlessly and help to coordinate so that we can affect implementation of some of these things.
So that's where, okay,
Yeah.
in terms of how do I feel about the czar idea, I feel that if the police and DPW and the administration, and the so-called czar were to sit down and say, this is how this could work, or you know what, this can't work. That's the step I would like to happen in order to
I think that's
make
fair.
it go.
Well, I would say that I think we're at that point now where something's not happening. It's not happening because there's no one overseeing it. And I don't know why. And we have not been told why things aren't happening. So this was our solution to actually make something happen. And if there's resistance from both sides on that position, where are we?
I think
We
we're
are,
right.
we
I
are
think-
where we were before.
Let's give it a chance to be vetted and see if, and, you know, we can put some timeline on it, get back to us in, you know,
So
July.
let's say in a week.
Tell us if that,
This is
No,
step
I'm
two.
serious.
We
Like,
thought,
I'm
we thought
serious.
step one was having it work the way it usually works, and step one didn't work, so to me, this is step two.
Why don't we have ready for one of the next upcoming meetings to have input about what the other departments think about it? I mean, rather than just kind of a generalized.
well, just set it, that's what I just said, set some date and let that be discussed among the people who would need to be coordinated. And then they come back and tell us, we can do this, or we see a problem here, we can't do this, and think
So
about
who's
that.
going to coordinate that?
So,
I guess Larry.
okay.
And then I think the thing is that it probably makes sense for, if we're talking about Walter, then it would make sense for Walter maybe to meet individually or with Larry.
Whatever is comfortable for them.
To sort of talk through what kind of process that would work with each of the various departments perhaps.
At least, I mean, I know all the players, as far as I know, you go along with folks. But I would say that beyond that, we don't need any more, except for the individual project, we don't need this is our plan. This is essentially a plan. We've articulated objectives elsewhere and so forth. We don't need a lot more analysis and planning, except with regards to the feasibility of certain specific projects. So the way to attack this is actually to go after specific projects, just start doing them, the simple ones once you've identified, the simple ones, which I think we actually have. The other ones you got to analyze and so forth. But I wouldn't spend a lot of time on trying to say, kind of come up with a plan and
Right.
thinking about what we're gonna do. Just jump in and do it. Once the issue that Connie is talking about has been resolved. And again, if you think of somebody else that would be better to do this, God, I mean, the objective is to get this done.
Oh, just don't, yeah, it's your job.
Have you mentioned the idea of a traffic czar to the chief? I mean, or is the police department aware of
He
it?
got a copy because he's aware of it.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think we talked about it last
We
week.
didn't.
No, it is in your notes here.
To me, it's only slightly different than having a committee, and I do think that we want to be able to move forward and decide on individual things, rather quickly. I mean, I think one of the problems of maybe having, 68 items or whatever is it's hard to figure out where to start and which ones are the low-hanging fruit, and they have been color-coded and things like that, but, I think that getting having you say, here's the ones that the 8 I think are low-hanging fruit, and Larry and the chief saying, well, 6 and 2 aren't because of these reasons.
Yeah.
So they go to the next one where we have to analyze cost, and then the analyze cost go into some of those actually require experts, because if you're gonna spend $30,000 on something, you wanna make sure you do it, or whatever it is, but I think that's where we can now break down this list and digest it into manageable bits for a weekly meeting with Larry that's 40 minutes that says, here, I identified the nine things that are low-hanging fruit that we think can be done as soon as you can get the manpower to do it. And if you can let us know what you think that is and check with Greg and the chief or whatever, and then you can really focus on those things. And then if there's an issue, Larry says, I don't think that 5 of these make sense, or the chief or whoever, and then you guys really feel strongly, that's when you'd have to come back to us, or whatever, to kind of figure it out. But I think we can take this big list and kind of say, here, digest these 3 things, Larry.
Well, I think simplifying it, I would just start with this list.
Yeah, that's the
But I think to me, it's almost you have to do it in combinations, the way this references this.
Oh, yeah, to get the details, to get some of the details.
Yeah, I agree.
The priorities are on here.
Yeah, and it seems like we have, some of these aren't done, some of the enforcement stuff
They
is
are.
process, and some of them just need to analyze costs.
Well, a lot of that is that way. A lot of it is basically the final detailitis stuff that needs to be
Yeah,
grabbed.
exactly, and I think that's why you need one person running with those things and saying, we need these 6 done by
Well,
July.
whoever's the traffic czar is gonna have the support of the committee behind them in any case to, continue research, to continue interacting with the neighborhood liaisons to help drive the analysis of stuff where appropriate, but it still seems like it's far easier to have one person interacting with the rest of the village rather than having a committee interact with the rest of the village for this kind of thing, for project management purposes.
I was gonna say, it sounds like that's what you need at this point. You've done pretty much all of the work and analysis, and now you just need a dedicated project manager to
Right.
execute, to oversee the execution of it.
We thought it was impractical for the village, hire the kind of ideal person. Just maybe someday, but
But did we talk about
not
what
sure.
the salary?
I did. I said, close. For some legal or other reasons, the way I had to pay a nominal salary, I would just donate it back to the village, the way I did with my trustee's salary, and so it wouldn't be any cost in any event, but if they had to do it for legal reasons, that'd be fine. But again, doesn't your son need a summer job?
Yeah, I think everything would be bite friendly since he's 10.
Is there any way to get input? Is there a way to get input from Larry and the police department right now, so that we don't have to have a separate meeting about this? Do people, to me, I like talking about things in public. I don't, and I think people can work together in public.
I feel comfortable with the plan as I described it, and if the rest of the board feels that we can go forward with that kind of offline Larry, Chief, Greg, then I think that's what we should do. It's not, it's a kind
I
of.
would find it kind of hard to believe that
Yeah,
the chief or Larry would be against it.
Right, so they'll.
But if they are against it, is there a
Well,
way
then
to
we'll-
report back
we'll-
why they're against it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're all supportive of it, so I mean, except that they have a major reason why it doesn't work, and I think
Right.
Larry would have spoke up already, and.
So,
There might not be specific issues,
But I mean, on the general approach, I don't think.
and then I think we've also, at least I have signed off in my head that there will be some expertise needed for some of these issues of traffic, a person. And that's where I think if the system is working, you would probably be the point person that would deal with this person and.
Well, help find a person and put them in touch with Larry and Chief.
Yes, so to kind of keep that moving, but I would think we would invest in such an expert so that we don't, go off on a line where you say, here's something, we're not sure that this is best practice. And, your judgment would come in there, and then we would vet it with such an expert.
But that can be done concurrently with
Yeah.
the lower hanging
Yeah,
fruit
yes.
of just
And
basic
I,
maintenance.
just for the record, I agree with the, several radar things. Again, as long as the police, have input and, that we don't put things in the, remember the stop sign we put up that was not a good idea? We had to take down that stop sign. There's always unintended consequences. Right, yeah. So just, I like to kind of think of minimizing things that don't work. And I would sign off on the radar, more radar ideas with that kind of, I also like the public program in the fall. I think that's a great idea. Just learning now about the officer in charge of enforcement, the 9 to 5 thing, I think that person would want to be involved in this public session. If you have a dedicated enforcement person, that person would seems to be.
Yeah, I just clarify one thing with Lieutenant Brown, that is, we did get assurance from Chief that he thought there was not with all due respect to the union, there's not a union issue.
Yeah, he said that's under his realm.
Yeah, that he can deploy this person as he.
Right. Yeah, so that's good news.
That had been a big question mark for a while, so that's why I'm trying to focus on that.
What is the status of that? Do we know?
We're calling people in for interviews this week, actually, next week.
We're always involved in that.
Yep.
And the other thing that just, for the record, when I went through this, I put like asterisk, double asterisk, things that I thought were really important on this document. And many of them fall into the things that are part of the Streetscape Main Street project and the physical changes that, they were vetted, not that they can't be vetted further, but those things that many of them are on your more long-term thing. I think those things are things that I have a lot of some significant difference, along with all these other things in the goal that we, all of us are trying to achieve. So I would not want to, because they're long-term and some of them, have a cost involved, I still have to put that priority on those things.
But the point is if the other easier affected things are happening, then we can be working on the longer term goals of the committee, which is really what we want to do. We don't want to spend our time on the small stuff that should be able to be implemented rather easily and without cost.
And, a lot of this, because I mentioned this to you, I know before, that a lot of this is not to usurp the streetscapes plan, but a lot of that fed into what was being talked about.
Yeah, it's in here.
But specifically, where we have some problems, for instance, is to get an enhanced sidewalk in. Right now, by enhanced, I mean that kind of thing that maybe is a different color, some other markings, who knows what's gonna be involved in an enhanced sidewalk. Right now, the one area that we knew that we were gonna get one on Main Street, in my understanding at the Aqueduct Crossing, is now kind of becoming a more extended project in design phase because there's so many different organizations, groups involved in the process, meaning the village, the school, the OCA, the state. So, and I was told that, my impression was that it's now, at least a good year and 18 months out before anything is gonna even begin with that. So in my mind, I don't know about Chris, as of a few weeks ago, when I try to cross in front of Village Hall, I often have to charge out of the way of cars who are absolutely have no intention of following state law to stop when someone steps into the crosswalk. So to me, there are some high visibility areas that maybe if a project like the aqueduct crossing is going to be complicated because of all the different parties, I'm not saying doing anything changing that at all, let that move on its own. But maybe we ought to also look at our high visibility crosswalk, whether it's Village Hall or down near
Dutcher.
We've got bulb ups going in there, but I don't know about the enhanced crosswalks going in there. Maybe this is a place where, it does make sense to sort of not put all the eggs into one train that's going to take a lot longer to come to the station.
We do have the other project, the Main Street and Broadway crossing, as well as the enhanced crosswalk across Broadway by Heritage Hill as well, so.
But we're limited there for DOT design.
Right.
So
But-
I'm talking about something that is designed specifically for Main Street.
I understand, but I'm saying they did it with the idea of doing enhanced crosswalks, so that, there's a lot of design cost has already gone into that, so I'm hoping that that's something that's not gonna be like, they really hate that, even though we're gonna spend, $200,000 on.
$200,000 on a pair of crosswalks seems just.
Well, it's not just crosswalks, though, there's a lot of other, especially the Main Street piece is a lot more complicated, because but, I think that hopefully that, we'll be able to use some of that to maybe get some enhanced crosswalk ideas as well, and then adapt those.
Well, I mean, the streetscape document was pretty clear about the kind of range of very specific options they recommended, and you can actually go over to Nyack and see right now on their Main Street that exact implementation being. It's not like rocket science. Now, maybe it is along Broadway, so don't get me wrong.
It's not rocket science, it's just
It's complicated.
governmental agency.
Yes, and I know Main Street intersection is complicated because of a lot of other issues there, but when we were going down Main Street to some of the crossover points, as I said, Dutcher Street or Village Hall, those seem to be the things that are totally in our control. Our control meaning the village control, and not that we should go off script and just do something crazy there, but maybe it is a way of taking the design work that's been done and making it make sense and cost effective for Main Street, for the rest of Main Street. So that's the kind of thing that I think would be a worthwhile discussion to have, rather than just twiddling fingers waiting for the aqueduct crossing to happen.
I agree with you, Mark, and I also agree with the issue that the parking ideas that were part of, brought up many times, but brought up in the streetscape in terms of safety from the side streets.
Right.
That's still an issue that it was always meant to be coordinated with this. So I'm just saying that in terms of, my priority document in my head, that project with all its manifestations, safety on Main Street, is a high priority. And we have a document that helps us already, and we should use it and then use the expertise that we may need, and then the nudge that all these projects need.
That was our reference point for everything on here that has to do with Main Street.
Yeah, I see it reference, I just put my asterisk there and just wanted to say that that's a high priority for me.
I have at least one closing statement that just, or observation that disjoints the conversation, but I think it's important to mention that when I went to Terrytown for their meeting with the chief of police and the trustee leading their effort, and I think the mayor was there. One of the things the chief mentioned was that in their analysis of speeds in the village, they tended to find rather overwhelmingly that people were not breaking the speed limit as posted, at least to any serious degree. And that parallels data that we've found on places like Station Road and elsewhere, as I recall. So then, why is that important? The issue is that, and it's addressed, changed the speed limit in a number of places to make travel safer and establish in some cases the absolute minimum we can establish by law, and probably in other places put warning signs. But anyway, the point is the analysis, that the analytics of it can be deceptive. Well, it's not really speeding because this is what the data shows, but that doesn't deal with the real issue of traffic safety. And that's what they were saying in Terrytown, and that, again, parallels something we've, as I recall, found here. Okay.
Yes, definitely, looking at the data, I mean, Station Road is a good example where no one's really, maybe there are some instances, but in general, there's not a lot of excessive speed, but maybe the speed is still too great for the curviness of the road.
Right.
Or running of stop signs.
And that's what the chief of Terrytown was saying. He agreed with that it's probably not low enough.
Can I just ask, since this was originally going to be a public meeting, can I officially introduce Maura Gennett, who is the Walking School Bus Coordinator? And she's been working a lot with Mark and I in the Walk Safe Irvington project. And is there any way that she could possibly say something if she?
Sure.
I don't know, not charged.
Did you have something you want to say?
Well, I guess the only thing I would say is that I came because I've come to this project and embarked on my own personal journey of driving much more slowly than I might sometimes feel like I could in town, because I'm with parents and I made it, I took on the role of trying to keep now almost 100 kids safe when walking to school. That's how much the program has grown. So from about 35 kids on the first walk through 10 weeks to almost 100. And that's a great improvement, but then people look at me and say, what's happening with Dow's Lane? And I have to say, for God's sakes, parents walk on the outside, children walk on the inside. And so once people look at you and say, hey, what's happening with this stuff? Well, that's why I'm here. So it's very nice to make all of your acquaintance briefly. And I guess since the project will no longer be under the school district, but will be transitioning to the PTSA in coming years, I'm going to try and give it some longevity in the neighborhood, but without, if parents don't feel like, these are people who are new to town and they really do make judgments based on the changes that they see. So I think the work that you guys are doing is important.
What is the Walk Safe? Oh, I'm sorry, Eric.
Oh no, I was just going to say, and to me, I can't wait to get back to these people like Maura and all the people that she works with and say, like, well, this is it. This is the timeline. We're going to do that sidewalk on Dow's Lane, and we're going to have it improved at this date or around this date, and it's moving forward. Your letters that you wrote to the Board of Trustees are actually having an effect. And I would want to be able to report back to people like that. And I think another reason why the traffic czar is a great position, because we can actually then report back to the people that we've asked to donate their time and to actually donate their opinions to everything that we do. Sorry.
No, I just was
in
wondering
terms
the
of
Walk
what
Safe.
the walking school bus is.
School bus?
Yeah, walking the school bus.
Oh.
So this was a program,
I don't know
a federal program for which the village and the school district, I believe, co-applied. Please correct me if I'm wrong, for funds for infrastructure improvements
Okay.
and safety improvements such as sidewalks, routes to school, and then the launch of a walk to school program, which is chaperoned by volunteer parents. So it doesn't have to be all parents, but some of the parents
Okay.
walk with a larger group of kids. So we got, groups of parents and children out on the road on 8 different routes from Dow's Lane, going to Dow's Lane, going to Main Street schools this spring. And I'm happy to send you a brochure, which I'm just getting printed up so you can have one to check out.
No, and one manifestation of that to the village is the sidewalks on Station Road, which to me have been fantastically improved, I guess, with federal money. So that seems to be a very successful program for a reason.
If we have a traffic person, I just, a bit of it, if it happens to be I, at least for a while, I just want to request that we do call it ombudsman and not czar. That's it.
What about Bob Massey, who wrote all those books about the stars? Can we ask him?
I used to teach,
Oh, you like
I used to
that.
teach Russian history along with Chinese.
Yeah.
So
I see.
I'm too sensitive to that term, I guess. So,
We'll have to call you the traffic bud.
but you could find somebody else, yes,
Traffic buddy.
you could check.
You just downgraded your uniform, by the way.
Anyways, thanks for listening to us, and we appreciate the hearing and the commitment. And despite whatever issues there are, time, the truth is, it's only a year old. We wish there were more progress, but, the board's been very supportive of getting this thing going. And my colleagues on the committee have been fabulous, and I know from my own experience with committees and boards in the village that committees can sometimes, good intentions kind of fall into desuetude and very, very, very easily and not get much done. But thanks to these guys, Mark, and the cooperation we have gotten from people, things have actually gotten done. We'd like to continue that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you need any more of these, Mary Beth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thanks. I love these stories.
Oh, no problem.
Definitely check. Yeah, I usually use them, I didn't know how fast you were using them up. But here's another bunch here. We got like 4 days left. Okay.
Put 2 in each one now. That's all right.
Thanks again.
You were trying to make me sit on the floor?
No, I was here to put me with it, I was trying to figure out what.
Nice to meet you.
That's a pleasure.
A lot of pages. Right center, right there.
Because there were no attachments to the,
No.
luckily, because it's big, right?
Yeah.
Big and strange.
Well, no, it just has a story behind it.
Okay. That's fine. All right, so when we last left the discussion of the capital budget, there was a quick review of the capital budget, and then there was some discussion about a couple of individual projects moving around or including them in there, which included, for example, the air conditioning feasibility study of the theater that was discussed last time. So what we've assembled here is the first page that we hand out is a summary of the capital budget as it was revised after that meeting initially. Yeah, I know. This should be on.
Speaking of air conditioning.
Yeah, it was no AC on for that whole time.
We were all hot seat.
What?
Didn't notice.
I was like, seriously, I'm freezing. Is it just me?
No, it wasn't.
I guess Larry's last year, 2022.
Yeah.
Same thing?
Yeah. So, actually, the front page is a nice graph, but the second page has a few numbers that are helpful to discuss. So the second,
It's okay,
yeah, sure. Coffee. So the second page is a schedule of the debt service associated with implementing this capital plan. And so schedule is actually a combined total debt service if all of the projects in the capital plan were to have been adopted. The handwritten notations next to each line represent the change in debt service in thousands between one year and the next. So the translation of that is, if you were to adopt all of the projects on this capital plan, your debt service would increase for next year's budget by 110,000 in round numbers. The year after that would be an increase of 113,000 and so on. And that, the numbers on that table are represented on the table.
Where'd you get 110,000? I'm not even.
The previous
Number
one.
in the second number.
Oh, I see. That little handwritten
Yeah, little
thing.
handwritten things.
Yeah, yeah, just to, just something to work with here. So that is the way we left it last time. Brandon and I have been doing a fair amount of talking about this, and I think one of the concerns that we have about this is that 110,000 is what you would need just to cover debt service next year of additional tax levy. We don't know what the tax cap's going to be. The numbers that we were looking at, are starting to trend upward in terms of inflation numbers, but the last cap that we're looking at is not applicable to the village, but the last one that they have calculated is 0.4%, which is higher than the 0.12 that it was back for us this past year. But you're talking about being able to raise your tax levy only about $50 plus thousand dollars,
So just a couple of those.
Yeah, the way it was drafted out here. And you haven't considered, we don't know what our pension costs are going to do. We haven't, medical, of course, you haven't even factored in allocating raises. So
it's a non-starter.
well, I think it's difficult to do that. I think it would be aggressive.
That
So
would make it hard.
yeah, so then what we did is we did alert the departments to this dilemma. And in some of the larger departments, worked with them to try to come up with an alternate plan, so to speak. And so I won't tell you the punchline yet, but I'll show you how we ultimately get there. So this is a revised schedule, which is marked up to show.
There's two.
Keep on there.
Two for the ladies.
So it's a revised project schedule to show how certain projects could be delayed, moved out to later years. Still keeping them on the radar screen, but just kind of doing the best we can to spread them out a little bit. Again, not really necessary to go through each one individually. I think the most significant one you'll see in year one is moving the planned renovations in Matheson Park out by an extra year. I know that there's some level of disappointment there from the recreation department, but I think the reality is that'll give them a little bit more time to work on design, and it really doesn't delay them by all that much.
Did that involve the bathroom design or?
Yeah, the bathrooms and the playground area.
But things are functional right now. They're just not optimal.
So, and they have been working diligently on the design, but the design isn't actually finished yet, which to me means.
You don't have to borrow before you need it.
Right, in effect, right. And so, I mean, these things take a little bit of time, especially in the summer. I wouldn't think that they'd be even getting out to bid until the fall. They really can't do the work in the winter, so they're not doing it until the spring. So you wait a couple of extra months and you're into the next fiscal year, you know what I mean? So that's kind of the discussion there.
There's something on the ground.
It's in that part, so we're not going to be doing that.
That's true.
So that's been the only notable one. The other out years, you'll see another one of note, which is on page 4, is the Ardsley train station sidewalk. That's pointed out as being removed. The reason that's being removed at this point is it's really a fluid situation, but I have a high degree of optimism that we'll be able to get that paid for, a significant portion of it paid for by Mercy College. I think they're very interested. They actually own more land than we thought they owned after looking at a survey. And they are very motivated. So, and, you know, we're working closely with them. There may be some expenses on our part. I'm not saying it's going to be zero, but I don't think it's going to be 250,000. So, but if that changes, we'll have to revisit this. So I think we can pull that out. And there are other projects. You'll see some of the flood control projects have been pushed off in like dominoes by a year. As you go through this, you'll see on page 7. You know, we're looking to push off a couple of drainage projects. On the other hand, it may turn out that when we arrive at that year, 2018-19, it may turn out that the back truck is not ready to be replaced. It's just a projection. So maybe we can do a little swap. You know what I mean? So, you know, this is a very fluid document from that standpoint. So,
I see the clock tower restoration.
yeah.
It's not dangerous or anything like that.
No, really, it does need attention. I know it was done not very long ago, but it is appealing, and we're trying to make sure that we address it sooner rather than letting it really deteriorate more significantly.
Sorry, under fire?
Yeah.
Police fire boat?
Yeah. On which year? I'm sorry, that's out, 2018-19.
I mean, I guess I'm just wondering what, is that, I mean, how, I guess that's not very critical. You mean, we have a,
We have an existing boat. They've asked, in this year, we've included this as an item, and the suggestion is that we're gonna push it off by another year. Now, you know, it may be that in the next couple of years, it turns out that things become critical and that we didn't anticipate, and we'll have to reconsider it. But at this point, we're trying to get another year out of it based upon this plan.
okay.
That's all. It gets much harder to project as you go farther out, of course, but so we're doing the best we can to at least include the items on the list. And, you know, what year they got actually, I mean, I couldn't have predicted, for example, that we would have had a garbage truck for 23 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
We would have ordinarily put that down in the 15 or 18 range. Other communities may have been shorter, so.
Washing it every day.
Yeah, yeah.
We have the serial killer just to kill the trucks.
Yeah, but you're right. That's all.
So, okay. I'm missing something here. So how many
There's more to the story.
There is, but yeah.
Well, maybe I'll wait for the punchline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the punchline?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine because you're probably going to say exactly what I asked.
Okay, let's see. Yeah.
Yeah, but now you're doing that, don't you? All right. There's 3 there, Mr. Chairman.
Is that good or not?
One for you. One for you.
All right, so, again, the graph is very nice looking, but turning to the numbers, the numbers people, you can see that the revised level of debt service shows a $42,000 increase. Not tiny, but yeah, less than half of what we had before. And actually, the tax cap holds where it is. It's actually less than the tax cap, which is not a novelty. We do also have a little bit of cushion in these numbers. I will say we do use a very conservative interest rate number. So the interest might be, there might be a $10,000 cushion if rates stay where they are. Yeah, so, but in any event, this is it's prepared the same way as the previous schedule, so it's apples to apples. So based upon the reallocation of those projects that you just looked at, this is what the future debt service looks like. This coming year, 42,000, I think, and Brenda thinks is manageable. Would we like it to be 0? Sure.
But the next year?
Next year is difficult, sure. But we have, we did manage to push off, you'll notice, we did manage to push off, let me get my right schedule here, hold on.
Back to the
Yeah, so Yeah, so, we managed to spread things out further. It does make next year a little bit more difficult. But I think there is some flexibility in that we could potentially push out one more year further on some of those projects for next year, because you
got a zero.
got a zero there, so there's some room for flexibility.
At this point, you can anticipate what it's
Yeah.
exactly gonna be.
So next year we'll be looking at the $140,000 worth of projects very closely and seeing if there's something to put off at that time. At this point, that's our best estimate. So I think there's room for flexibility, that's all I'm saying.
And the fact that there's no department heads here banging the table, it seems like they might not have been happy, but they can live with it.
Yeah, I circulated this, in all fairness, I didn't circulate it all that early to them, but I did hear from two, and had a good discussion with Joe. He understands completely, and he's already spoken to Larry Lumpy, so he understands, where we're going with this. And spoke to Greg, none of his first year projects were being pushed off, but other projects on the other years were, and he's comfortable with that. I think the biggest concern he expressed was the current replacement money being pushed out a year, but he would argue that maybe we should need to do some curb work before you do the paving, so maybe we'll switch that at some point and push the paving out a little more, you know what I mean? But that's a couple of years from now, so that's.
So is anything we're deferring that's going to be critical to the village? Or risk critical, I mean? That
No, we were very careful to look at the critical ones and keep those in there. I think the flood control projects are difficult projects, and so we'd like to get to them as soon as we can. But they're on the list, and we're addressing them, pretty steadily.
And the flood controller, that's nothing that is grantable or partially funded?
Yeah, we've looked at really the only place for that. There's FEMA and then there's local county money. The county money does not appear that it would work for us because it's typically tied in with affordable projects, and so we don't quite have that yet.
Well, we do have the one house on the floodplain.
Yeah, I know, but none of the projects we have are going to affect that, though. That's not. I know what you mean, but that doesn't work. The federal FEMA projects, we have in the past applied and put in a letter of intent. The problem with it is that there are no compelling significant losses in terms of flood insurance claims in any particular area. So we've talked for years about that away being a problem, right? Now it's been pretty good since we've taken care of the reservoir, and it's been better. But even in some of the bad years, there were not significant claims made on flood insurance, and that's what drives it's a cost benefit thing. So it's been difficult. I'm not saying they're non-existent, but it's just not there yet. So the only significant flooding we had in recent years was from Sandy, and most of those businesses down there didn't have flood insurance, or some. And even then, none of these projects address that.
Right.
So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Where's your pitch?
Kind of switching gears a little bit, would we want to put a small amount, 25,000 or something, or maybe 50,000 for some of to pay for some of the, maybe we got more radar units or enhanced signage or any of that stuff? Or do you think we can fund most of that stuff through the regular budget? Would need to use the capital budget for it?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that we do, and I think you probably recall us talking about this, is that there are some projects, as you go through these lists, that we choose that are either funded through the operating budget, therefore they don't require any borrowing, directly by our surplus, one-time only surplus money being used. Use of surplus in that manner does not get you in trouble. It doesn't block you into having to do it again next year and the next year. It's not like appropriating it as part of your tax rate, as part of your budget. This is a one-time only, and we use it to offset for smaller projects. What you mentioned is a perfect example of that, yeah.
Because one of the things it seems like is also that, why would you have any kind of even a 5-year debt on stuff that, like marking of pavement might only last 2 years before you have to go and mark it again.
We probably couldn't even, we couldn't even borrow for it if we wanted to, so. But for the radar units, those are hard units.
One of the ones that court stays in is 10 grand or something.
Or maybe something about the sidewalk crossings if they require more physical installation of the pavement.
Yeah, no, that could be done. But,
Oh, I just noticed, does this capital budget include any of the streetscape, or has that been projected at all?
no, the first big project was the Aqueduct Crossing. That was done last year, year before, whatever it was. It was in a previous year. So it's already in these numbers that are in our debt service because we borrowed for it already. And then, of course, we received additional funds through a grant.
Okay.
So altogether, we're spending on that project. We did receive another grant for the Town Hall Theater Plaza out here on the corner of the building. Plaza. Yeah. Trying to come up with a name. We also got a small grant for benches. Those are all items that were in the streetscape plan. But we have not put into this budget any sort of a plan for implementing all the various other improvements that were mentioned, larger improvements like the art park, like the mini play park next to the rec center, intersection improvements down at the bottom.
Stormwater thing with all the.
Right, there's a whole series of other capital projects that could be done. I think, at least my approach and our approach, all of us up till now, has been to be opportunistic as far as grants go. This is not the kind of plan that you can just take off the shelf and say, all right, here's $2 million, let's put it in flight and do it. I mean, none of us.
We purposely set it up to be phased.
Yeah, and the projects that we're pulling off of here are high impact, low dollars. I mean, even the Aqueduct Crossing, I mean, that's relatively low with the grant. So we got to go on paying for our buck with that, as opposed to just saying, let's throw it on the list and pay for it. I think that's.
You also said that there was federal transportation things that could kick in as grants also for some of this.
So one of the things, one of the follow-ups to the whole conversation that we had happened to be by email, as you know, about the consolidated funding application, is that the consolidated process does not include any money for like transportation transportation improvements. So there's none of the federal money in that process to deal with pedestrian safety improvements, roadway improvements, bridges, all the different things that come that the federal government fights about all the time in Congress, right? And
How is that allocated out?
it's done in separate grant rounds that are usually
the
in the
consolidated piece.
it's that's being distributed through the state. So it's the state DOT that typically runs the grant program, like the State Routes to School. It's a perfect example of a project. I think that we have an opportunity with some of our roads that are considered, they're called federal aid roads. Federal aid roads are specific roads in our village which are eligible for federal money, and those would include Main Street, Broadway is a state road, East Sunnyside, Harriman, and I think Ardsley Avenue, and Hudson Road, because they lead to train stations. There's certain criteria that they lead to major highways or whatever the criteria are, but Main Street is one of them. So I think it makes a lot of sense after this consolidated funding process is over this year that we utilize the services of our grant writer to position us as best we can be positioned for significant upgrades to comprehensive look from top to bottom, implementing many of the things that are identified in the streetscape. But it can't just be nice things that look nice. It has to be pedestrian safety, all the safety stuff.
Safety pieces that.
So, and that's this is no guarantee. I'm just saying that's the program.
Yeah.
That's the program to go after, or those are the types of funds to go after for something like that. So,
Could I ask a question in relation to it? And you can tell me it's not the time to talk about it, but where are we, speaking of Main Street and other ways of looking at some of the issues of the wires, microgrid, did they ever get back to us with a revised model of working together?
And that number's not in here, by the way.
I understand.
Because I don't know.
No, I know, but I mean, you know, there's a lot of, that's like, as we talk, that could be a significant leveraged money. I mean, there could do quite a bit more than just the part the village would put in.
Right. I'm totally with you.
So I'm just wondering about, are we supposed to follow up with them? Are we waiting for them? Or
We're waiting for them, but I'm happy to follow up.
does it sound? It sounds like maybe at least even a ping to them, saying what's up.
Anyone else from the board?
No, I'm okay.
So the projects that we suggested above and beyond these, when you ask us, what, if you could add anything you wanted, do you want in this next one, what happened to that? Oh, so where are they in this, all this numbers and figuring?
Which projects are we talking about?
So when we, yes, when we had the last conversation, maybe because no one else agreed with me, it never got on here.
Which is that?
Oh, like
Which
buying a
was
van.
the idea of, just like it's in the safety thing here, and just like we heard from, all the issues about Broadway and people taking kids to school and all the commuters, that we have some kind of van, some kind of, clean energy powered van that could have different computers and perhaps for just doing some people driving to school and all that. So it got rejected with no one
Well,
else.
no, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard, the answer that I heard that night was that the decision to buy the bus is the easy part. The hard part is the operating budget side of it, and figuring out how to run it and pay for it. So I believe the conversation was you need to figure out how to operate it and have it work into your operating budget before you allocate money in a capital plan to buy it.
In fact, it is in the.
I mean, it's in, I just reread it in here.
It really says one of the key things is to do basically a community study to see what characteristics would make it usable or of interest to people. You don't want to just buy a van and try to start running it and then have people decide that.
No, I totally agree with that. I never thought.
Well, that would be the next step, would be to decide that it was important to do some kind of a study.
It was, because it was in here, it was in the streetscape plan, it's been,
But it hasn't made it into the
but
operating
it
budget.
never got any further.
Right, so I think that's how that conversation ended, which was, I think it's unrealistic to put it in the capital budget without having that first conversation, that's
So
all.
can we keep that in somebody's consciousness so that we have it
Like,
when we do the next?
I'm only one person that would want to take a van, but there's you, but.
Well, I think,
This is a big problem, we have to change behavior, just like you're trying to change
I think it'd be easier to
behavior.
get people to walk from everywhere in
Well,
town to
that's-
take a van, because everyone hates to wait for anything here.
Well,
That's why
you
we
know
do
what?
apps.
When they wait for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, when we heard people come, I try to go to the drive to the station. Now it takes me 30 minutes, and then I drop again. So all we heard was complaints
down there too.
about
I
that.
still think that
And then there's no space to
well,
put
why
it.
don't we, I mean, the only way to address
So
this is to have
it's
some
something
kind
I
of
would,
poll or study or whatever.
and I don't think a municipality our size can run an effective mini transit system.
The bus driver.
Well, the problem is even when you have on-demand type of stuff, think about the, like the, what do you call it, the airport shuttle buses where they come and they pick up people but you don't necessarily get there at your time because they take a route to pick up as many people as they can pick up on the way or drop off, so.
Maybe privatized car service, like.
Happy to
How does
have
that story do it? Because that story has a commuter or something.
but
That's doesn't that serve Ardsley, or no?
Yeah, it goes around.
I don't know how
I
far.
thought it was because, I think it's Archie doesn't have a train station, so that's what they did it.
Oh, is that why? Oh,
I
okay.
thought so, but
I just be part of the,
I
you know,
like that.
keeps people involved and.
I think that it's gonna,
like for artsy customers.
No, we should have, but I mean, if we could find I mean, that's the problem, what's the density that would require?
I mean, I don't know, I can say you can just reject it outright, or you can say, there's a problem, there should be a way to look at research and experts to say, how do little villages solve that kind of problem? It's been suggested by professionals once. It can't be that outlandish an idea. So if we're thinking about clean energy and we're thinking about congestion and safety.
People said they can't park in front of Jordan, so they can't
Well,
park
we
anywhere on Main
have
Street.
to
Say, well,
change behavior.
All
I
right.
mean, we're trying to change driving behavior.
I agree.
Don't we agree that that can be
But it's,
changed?
but it's, to me, this is a much bigger leap to say, you know, don't bring your car. We'll pick you up around 8:15. You should get to your train by
You're
around
making the worst case scenario.
most likely scenario.
Well, today maybe.
I mean, I think about Mercy College and had shuttle buses that didn't work for them. You know, like it's. I don't know. I think there's a.
I think we do ourselves a disfavor if we just outright, you know, reject ideas that are really going to be part of the future, because it's not going to work just to have people just, you know, all drive themselves in a congested little area. It's going to get harder and harder, and then they're going to say, we need something, because now the wait at home would be better than the amount of time it's going to take to get to the train station.
I don't necessarily disagree at all, Connie, I just think the problem is, we have to define, I think we need some way to have, you know, it's not just a simple poll. It's a survey, but it's complex because you're talking about trying to get people to think about different behaviors and, you know.
It's beyond our expertise, anybody here at this table, I would say.
I'd rather a ski lift up the middle of Main Street myself.
I had suggested that years ago.
I wanted a trolley too, this one right up and down.
Yep.
So just to be clear,
Yes.
to be as clear as mud, I need to have concrete direction from the majority of the board in order to work on this. Not that I'm not willing to work on stuff, but there's disagreement over whether to even do anything. So when you all have time to think about it and
Well,
come back
it
and
is
discuss.
in the traffic recommendations, but it isn't a number one priority. It's a secondary priority because it seemed to be a much longer term
Right,
problem.
right.
So
But
we should-
again, just because it's in the traffic.
When was the last time anyone here on the board applied something anywhere? A public bus,
I
like
understand
planes or something.
that. I'm just saying that it was determined to be not an immediate priority, but something that we worked for. But obviously, at what point do we say we need to have, we need to seriously consider a study, a survey of the market, so to speak?
I can see it too if we had like an off-site parking or something. Park there and then, you know.
I thought, I suggested that 6 years ago.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, to me, I still don't think people are gonna wanna do it. That's it.
Eventually, they're gonna have so much of a problem doing what they're doing, and it's gonna be less safe and less convenient, and eventually there'll be pressure to change.
It seems like right now we got that problem at the high school, middle
Well, that's
school
what I'm
complex.
using as
I mean,
that
You know what we do
example.
though? We have buses that can take those kids, but the kids don't even wanna take the buses. So it's, to me, we're trying to, you know, that's the reason that that's so crowded, is because no one wants to take the bus.
If we had jitneys that would look like the stuff they have in India with all this kind of brightly colored and great music blaring, you know, then.
Those are all private, by the way. I'm just throwing out.
Probably pretty cheap.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's.
I will bring it up again, I will bring it up again in a year. I will bring it up again in a year.
Well, now here's the thing, okay, fine, but what would a study like that take? Oh, I don't even have a sense of what that, is that like a $10,000 study, or is that a,
Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
I mean,
It's a knowable, I mean, I know we could research what kind of people who are consultants on this kind of thing.
It seems to me that someone maybe in the complete streets arena, or well, Pace, perhaps, you know, because they're really looking at, what do you call it, you know, transit-oriented development.
When all these people lose their licenses because they've been speeding on Main Street, they have 12 points on their license, they won't be able to drive
Yeah,
to the station anymore. All right, let's not discuss it anymore. You don't need to do anything.
So, if there aren't any other questions about this, what we'll do is prepare the alternate version of this capital plan. Which sounds like there was some agreement with doing that. And
So the one thing we added in was the study for the theater.
yes, and that's in there still.
Yep.
It's already.
Yeah. That was a change from the original one.
Yeah. And then the traffic items would be an appropriation, either fund, I have to look and see how much money, but either fund balance or contingency.
And the traffic things, you mean like the signage you're talking about?
Yeah, that's
Or
the
Things are gonna
crappy
be very
old.
expensive.
No, that's what I mean, that's probably outside of the capital budget. We'll take care of that second.
Okay, so that doesn't have to change here.
We can do it directly through the jet operating budget. We put whichever department.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, the spray and paint.
All right, so do we have to vote on this adjustment?
On Monday.
No, it'll be on the agenda Monday.
We got a pretty one, without lines on it.
More paper.
Yeah, handwritten stuff. And then, once you adopt it, Brandon will work diligently on the bond resolutions. And then you'll see those at the July meeting for your approval. And then we'll be on our way.
Well, I'll give you back all these. I don't know if you can do it.
Yeah.
If it was necessary.
Do you want to take them back there?
If you don't want,
Oh, I'll clean one on
that was
Monday.
actually a clean copy of the new, of all the projects once again. So we need to go that way.
Okay. I'm just thinking, port three. Yeah. Port three.
So we'd have to recycle that.
Okay.
Cheers.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't see, do you have?
Yes.
Very satisfied.
I don't.
Oh, you can see mine.
I'm actually seeing. I have to admit, I have not had a chance to look at this at all. So I'm running scared. No, I'm running like I'm empty. Maybe you can point out things that I should think about. Which one are we looking at?
This is Dennis's butching our river.
Or major projects.
No, I was looking at the open items. Major projects, I don't know what there is to talk about.
Yeah, there's something like solar panel review requirement. I guess we'll leave it on until we're done, but,
But we got that.
so I was looking for things we can take off, actually.
I would definitely get the parking thing back on.
How about ARB checklist?
No, the parking thing was never taken on.
No, I know, it's,
Right.
but it's just,
This is not a comprehensive to-do list of things that we had to do. These are things that came up in meetings. That's all this list ever was. If you want it to be a comprehensive to-do list, it's about 10 pages long.
no.
I mean, it's okay, but.
But remember the things that
Right.
you do want to do, so it kind of serves that.
Are we near completion on 53? Location data for traffic light? It sounded like
It's not like
the chief were really close to getting some from them.
Yeah, we'll get the report
Oh,
finalized.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why there was redaction on there, but, the solar panel, I wrote you and Brian about the concern of, I don't know if this really, it's ARB, we were talking about the ARB and the ZBA thing.
That's lovely.
Their concern was, should we talk about it now, or do you want me to wait?
Wait, I'm sorry, is this the standards? Review standards?
Yeah,
When did you write that?
today.
I saw an email that it was in response to.
Oh, no, yeah, it was not the review standards per se, they seemed to be in general, it seemed they were in general agreement, although there was some misunderstanding at first about the words, the standard being arbitrary and whatever, capricious, and I had to explain to them, and I think Rick tried to, one of the architects was a little upset, but I tried to explain that that's very specific legal language that is much different than a review that has to do with variance. And, you know,
So you got the feedback, because I haven't heard a word from anyone.
well, you should be getting it from, hopefully from Rick Unified. He hadn't really
I
gotten
plan
it.
to be here, I think, Deb, Hargraves, plans to be on Monday, because she knows that's on the agenda.
It's only to be announced,
Yeah.
public hearing,
Yeah.
so.
Well, wasn't at the ARB meeting on Monday,
So,
whatever it was.
Okay. Well, it's only on for announcement. The public hearing would be July 20th.
right.
So there's a little bit of, okay, so on that one, there's a little bit of misunderstanding, a little bit of education perhaps, a little bit more, so they understand, because they said, well, the reaction was, well, the ZBA thinks we're arbitrary and capricious as it is, and I said, no, you don't understand, that's a very specific legal term, and, you know, if you're following your guidelines and if you're following your procedures, it's very hard to, you know, to be arbitrary and capricious. Anyways, so what came out of that was the minutes.
Yeah.
That's what I wrote you about.
Yeah, I'll look at that, that's fine.
And then the thing about whether or not they can, there's actually, their continuance is legal for the ARB. So those are the issues that came out.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay.
To do it anyway.
To the benefit of the
Yeah,
applicants.
I'm not making a judgment on this.
How are we going to resurrect sign code? Isn't that really supposed to be a meeting? But
It's with Ed and Mary Ann and you and me.
yeah.
Yeah.
We have to get a 6-pack or something and sit down and do it. I don't know who's the gating factor at this point. Is there a time that's better than others, or what?
No, it's really just setting up a meeting, that's all.
Yeah.
So,
How about the sidewalk repair list? Have you ever got that?
yeah, we had a short-term list, I think, that I had circulated around, but let me see what the, let me see if Greg's updated that.
And maybe at the same time, you ask Greg about any crosswalks he currently has planned to restripe.
Which one are you looking at?
63, 64.
Yeah. This is, the Aqueduct Crossing crosswalks are one that's,
Seems like
Obvious.
the lowest of the low-hanging fruit.
and there's some signage that we've talked about with that.
Other than that, anybody else have anything else on this list?
There was something. Oh, the solar panel stuff. I didn't look at what you sent around to us. Did you get a chance to look at that Nikki
Oh.
forwarded?
Oh, no,
I was just wondering.
Oh, that's right. Oh,
We should do it yesterday.
So, unpack where we were.
no, I didn't get a chance to
Right.
take a look at Mary Ann as well.
Oh, right. Okay.
Anything else?
I'm happy to pull it at night if we can.
I will make a motion to adjourn. If I get a second.
I will second that.
All in favor? Janice?